Hi, everybody. So my name is Marianne Garr, and welcome to my presentation on anorexia nervosa. So the IDEA definition is the same as the New Jersey state definition. They both categorize anorexia as an emotional disturbance. So that means that they have an inability to learn that cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, or health factors, an inability to build or maintain satisfactory interpersonal relationships with peers and teachers, inappropriate types of behavior or feelings under normal circumstances, a general pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression, and/or a tendency to develop physical symptoms or fears associated with personal or school problems. So a child has to have one or more symptoms over a long period of time and to a marked degree that adversely affects a student's educational performance. So some of the diagnostic criteria, the first one is the restriction of energy intake. So this could be categorized as calorie restriction, fasting. Now, an intense fear of gaining weight or becoming fat or persistent behavior that interferes with weight gain, just be a phobia of gaining weight, of wanting to lower the number on the scale. And the last one is body image disturbance. So it's also known as body dysmorphia. So this is when you view your body as larger than it really is. It's just from the disordered thinking that you see yourself as a bigger version of yourself in the mirror. So now let's go on to some developmental characteristics found in those with anorexia. When someone is starving themselves, they are not receiving proper nutrients, vitamins, and minerals necessary for adequate brain function. And because of this, a deficiency of varying nutrients affects how a child may act in an academic setting. So for example, iron, this has an immediate effect on the student's ability to concentrate and will lead them to what would usually take them around 30 minutes to do before they got the disorder would take them about 2 hours once they actually have anorexia because of the lack of energy and ability to concentrate. So they also have a decreased ability to listen and process information. So this is because they're overwhelmed with the constant thought of food. So imagine you're in class and you have around 30 minutes before you have to go to lunch and you are so hungry and you can't stop thinking and fantasizing about that sandwich that you had packed and that special cookie that your mom had made. You won't be able to focus because you're so hungry. All you can think about is food. That's what people with anorexia are like all the time. So this makes it very difficult to concentrate and even more difficult for them to process information that they're being taught. And reduced memory function, again, is because they're preoccupied with the intricacies of their disorder and they're uninterested in other matters. So the physical characteristics are more obvious and are a telltale sign. So the extreme weight loss, this is the core reason why some people are hospitalized because these lead to a lot of health complications. So a thin appearance, this does not necessarily mean anorexia, but when it's accompanied with extreme weight loss or other symptoms, then it could possibly be anorexia. So fatigue and weakness. Fatigue is from the body trying so hard to keep the organs running that it neglects the brain. And you are not actually getting a good night's sleep because your body is constantly working to keep you alive. And the weakness in the body is because it seeks out fat and muscle deposits within yourself that when there's no longer adequate energy intake by mouth and the muscles begin to deteriorate. So you won't be as strong as you used to. It'd be harder to walk upstairs. Also, there's a higher chance of dehydration, which does lead to fatigue and weakness and a lot of like passing out and fainting. So the bluish discoloration in the fingers, this is an extreme form of habitual cold that individuals with anorexia experience. So the bluish discoloration means that there's not any or rarely any blood flow to the fingers or to the extremities. And this is because without fat deposits, it's harder for the body to regulate the temperature. And they neglect the outsides of the toes, the fingers, the hands, the feet, so that they can work on keeping the core safe. So the thinning of the hair or it falling out, this is also connected with the skin and the nails because they all rely on proper minerals to grow strongly. So the nails in the hair, they begin to deteriorate and we will be brittle and break off easily. And then the skin will lose its natural healthy glow and will either become like a yellow color or have a gray hue. So hair growth on the whole body, as you can see on the right, this is actually very common among premature underweight infants. So the hair is used to regulate temperature and keep the person warm when they're underweight. So these hairs are usually small, but they're darker than peach fuzz and they're seen all over the body. And next we have a disrupted menstrual cycle or absence of the cycle entirely. So that's due to the lack of estrogen in the body. So the body knows that it's not a suitable candidate for a child because it cannot obtain enough nutrients and energy to keep like they're barely hanging on, keeping yourself alive. So they just know, it just knows that it won't be able to sustain and create a healthy child. So the social side of things, these are more gradual as the disorder progresses, and it usually starts out with a fixation on exercising and dieting, which is it's all they can think about. Frankly, all they can talk about too. You might see them researching it a lot, exercising in their room late at night when no one's watching. And they also may view it as a competition, and not with other people, but with themselves. So they'll set weight goals, like their ideal weight. And once they reach that weight, their weight goal will stretch further and further until they wither away to nothing. It will cut to a point where they just lose control, and their only thought is just to get as thin as possible. So not finding pleasure and withdrawing from social groups and distancing from loved ones, these are due to similar causes, and they're from the deficiency of serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin from a lack of nutrients. So these hormones regulate pleasure and an overall feeling of fulfillment, which sufferers have a hard time obtaining. They may also withdraw from people if they are suspicious of their disorder and view them as the enemy. So, for example, it's me and my disorder against the world. So the denial of hunger and insisting that you've already eaten, this is a common tactic used to ease the worries of others, but the irregularities are also due to physical things. So this can stem from a deficiency of hormones such as cortisol and peptide YY, which regulate the feeling of fullness and hunger pains. And the stomach also shrinks gradually to accommodate the amount of food that's being intaked over a long course of time. So if you have been under eating for a long period of time, your stomach will adjust to that amount of food and grow smaller. So having specific food rituals or rules, these are crucial because most people with this disorder have obsessive tendencies, and they use this as another way of controlling their disorder, feeling like they have a handle on it. So some of these rules involve safe foods. They allow themselves to eat specific times when eating is permitted and areas where they can eat. And they might also cut up a piece of food a certain amount of times or chew it a specific amount of times to maintain order in their head. So the emotional characteristics, they tend to be visible prior to the development of anorexia, but they're amplified as the disorder progresses. So the common characteristics of those with restrictive anorexia are high achievers and perfectionists, and they also suffer from anxiety and OCD. So the hyperactivity and the impulsivity, they could be present prior, but they get much worse as the disorder progresses. So the increased irritability and mood swings, they are also due to irregularities and deficiencies in hormones, such as serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, cortisol, and leptin. So as these levels fluctuate, so do the moods. So these emotional symptoms are why those with anorexia can be described as shells of themselves and impulsive, because their emotions are rarely ever stable and they're all over the place. So low self-esteem, this is typical for this disorder, and it gradually gets worse as it progresses. So no matter how thin the person may get, they will always wish to be thinner. And the feelings of worthlessness and depression are also common, which contributes to why 1 in 5 individuals with anorexia commit suicide. So the personal narrative that I read about this disorder is Skinny Boy by Gary A. Grawl. It's a very good book. I highly recommend it. And this is a story of how the author, a popular baseball player, He spiraled into anorexia and hypergymnasia, which is an obsession with exercise due to a fear of becoming fat. So he illustrates his experiences within a psychiatric hospital and the lessons he had learned throughout his journey. So one main insight that I grabbed from this was stigma. So Gary himself refused to believe that he had an eating disorder because he had coined it as a girl's disorder and thought less of himself because he had it. Even people in the hospital asked him how he coped when others did not take his pain seriously, such as friends from high school, his parents at home. Since boys with anorexia in the 1980s, it was basically unheard of. So Gary exhibits his intrusive thoughts. These thoughts, they spew negativity at him and controlled how he acted. He coined it the word it. So it was basically the embodiment of his anorexia coming up and controlling what he did, what he said, how he reacted to things. He felt as though it was a part of him and that he was entrapped by it. It was not until he found love for himself again that the voice finally quieted. So frustration and disappointment, they go hand in hand because they're the emotions felt by his family and himself. So he felt frustration towards himself because he didn't know how to stop it, and disappointment within himself, either when he would eat or when he wouldn't eat. It was a constant battle of trying to get better versus falling into your disorder. So his parents felt that as well. So they felt the frustration because they did not understand why Gary could not just eat and just get it over with. And then they also felt disappointment because they were worried that they were the ones that caused him to be like this, and they had no idea how to react. So Gary pulled back from his family, and his family pulled back from him. So, however, with proper counseling, the family was able to reconnect and work together to combat Gary's eating disorder. So the challenges and strengths. When it comes to strengths, many may view people with anorexia as having excellent discipline and being high achievers. So this could not be any more wrong. The level to which these obsessive and discipline-based behaviors are the bane of this disorder and what tie these people to it in the first place. So ultimately, this disorder does not have any strengths because it sucks the life out of the people that it poisons. For challenges, stigma is one of the main ones. So while I previously mentioned the stigma against males, there's also a stigma that particular people with an eating disorder have to fit into a type. So atypical anorexia, rather than restrictive anorexia, these are those that have the emotional and behavioral disorder thinking common with anorexia, and they are also restricting, but their physical bodies, they're not losing weight. They're not losing weight at such alarm rates to the point where they are extremely underweight. So luckily, we as a society are bettering every day, and their voices are finally being heard, but doctors tend to simply ignore people who have atypical anorexia and think of them as being okay, not having anything wrong with them because they're not reaching that unhealthy of a weight, even though their minds are destroying themselves. So another challenge is relapse. So while someone can take medications for other comorbid disorders such as depression, anxiety, and OCD, there is no cure or definitive treatment for anorexia. And because of this, relapse is extremely common. So while it can be quieted, the voice of the eating disorder within your head does not fully go away. So treatment, a disciplinary approach is best, and it includes a mixture of counseling, behavior modification, and nutritional support. So this can be applied at an outpatient facility, a residential hospital unit, or an intensive inpatient facility, depending on the severity of the disorder. Finally, there are long-lasting psychological and health effects, which I'll go over in the next slide. So for those who deal with starvation and malnutrition for longer periods of time, the absence of periods may lead to infertility. So this is because the body continues to sense that it is not stable in nutrients to provide for a baby, so it fails to be viable. So because it was devoid of nutrients and it was not healthy for an extended period of time, it views that it can go back to that at any moment. So no matter how long they are in recovery, they could fall right back into it, and their body does not trust itself with carrying a baby, on simple terms, of course. So osteoporosis is a disease affecting brittle bones, and there's less bone density. So this is common among the elderly, but it's also extremely common for children and teens with anorexia. So since they're still growing, their bodies are lacking the necessary calcium and other vitamins for healthy bone growth, which causes osteoporosis. And like I said before, the body pulls from fat and muscle deposits for energy in anorexia. So while this can lead to organ failure because of the lack of nutrients, cardiac arrest is also extremely common because the heart itself is a muscle. Because of this, the heart will slowly deteriorate until it can no longer function. So the body is slowly eating away at the heart until it just stops. It doesn't have any life left in it. So brain damage is also common because of lack of nutrients within the brain during malnutrition. So especially in children, since they're still developing, a lack of nutrition can cause the brain to shrink and result in permanent brain damage. However, if you were to make a full recovery, this brain damage will go back to, your brain will go back to normal and it will be reversible. But if you continuously go down the cycle of relapse, the brain may start to get worse and the brain damage will become permanent. So death is a grim reality in the face of eating disorders, which are the most deadly out of all mental illnesses combined. Cardiovascular problems, organ failure, and suicide are the top most common causes of death from an eating disorder. And anorexia nervosa is deadly, and the glamorization and lack of information of such illnesses contribute to the rise in cases. So here's a video that presents some statistics and facts surrounding anorexia and eating disorders as a whole to get a better handle and understanding of it. So as a teacher, there are many ways that we can support a student who is suffering from an eating disorder. So first of all, the main thing you want to do is speak to the student about the warning signs that they're displaying. Make sure to not come off as accusatory, but rather more concerned. Advise that they visit the nurse or the school psychologist as well, and if they're not receptive, a lot of them might be in denial and just completely shut you down. So then you should notify the parents of your concern and ask to make a meeting. So while this may not automatically work, notifying the parents will give them something to think about and look out for in their child. For those who are in recovery, it is essential to be flexible when it comes to accommodations. So the students may or may not get an 504 or an IEP, but try to work with the student regardless while they're undergoing treatment. So this may include longer testing times for those who have issues with concentration and memory, um, preferential seating, the ability to go to the counselor's office during class when they feel overwhelmed, and also snacking during class, which might help them with their food intake. So coordinate with the parents and the school psychologist to see where the student is struggling and how to support them. And finally, educate yourself in your class. So the main course of prevention of eating disorders is to spread awareness. And luckily, New Jersey mandated that eating disorders must be covered in the curriculum. So you may have a student with an eating disorder and you have no idea. And presenting information to the class may be the push they needed to finally seek help. So this slide is a little list of resources for teachers and families. So the first website, this is a list of articles, and they're based on eating disorder legislature, prevention, causes, array of research material to better understand eating disorders as a whole. So the second thing is the National Eating Disorder Hotline. So a licensed professional is online 24/7, and they'll be able to provide support and options for those who are struggling. So it would be beneficial to take this number along with numbers such as the suicide hotline and place them around the room in your classroom just in case the student may need it. So the next resource is a packet. This lists ways to approach anorexia as an educator and have prevention tools that you can use in your school, and the information is very extensive, very in-depth, and there's also infographics that could be used in the class as well. The next site, ANAD, this is a nonprofit organization that provides free of charge support, referrals, awareness, etc., to those who are suffering from an eating disorder or who have a loved one who is struggling. So this is a nice basis site where you can see the options to treating this disorder, and they also give you the means of not having to spend as much money because it can be very pricey to get treatment. Last but not least, there is the school psychologist or counselor within the school. So since they work with school-age kids, they are familiar and experts on eating disorders and the prevalence of it. So they can provide insight and advice when it comes to your concerns with a specific student or your class as a whole. So here are my sources. Thank you so much for watching my presentation. I hope that you all have a great summer and that you stay healthy. Have a great day.